We met at his home in Tucson, Arizona, a couple of thousand miles and a world away from the streets of New York, where back in 1927, Joe Bonanno first came into contact with the mafia kingpin of his day, Salvatore Maranzano. Your first hero?
That's right.
Was Salvatore
Maranzano. Yes.
But then you say he was said to be able to snap a man's neck with his fingers. And I say when I read that...
That's a metaphorical.
Well, it's quite a metaphor.
Well,
it's quite a metaphor. He also told you this. Man is the hardest animal to kill. When you aim at a man, your hands shake, your eyes twitch, your heart flutters.
I won't run from the storm. I arrive after it.
Salvatore Maranzano wasn't just another mob boss. He saw himself as a true Sicilian mafia leader, deeply rooted in old world traditions. Born in Costa del Mare del Golfo, Sicily, he brought with him a belief that the mafia should operate under a strict hierarchy, modeled almost like a Roman Empire-style command structure. He was reportedly educated, intelligent, and unusually disciplined compared to many gangsters of his time. Unlike street-level criminals, Maranzano believed in order, rank, and authority, which would later shape how organized crime was structured in America. Maranzano's rise to power came during one of the bloodiest conflicts in mafia history, the Castellamarese War. This war wasn't just about territory. It was a clash between old-school Sicilian bosses like Maranzano and more modern, business-minded gangsters like Lucky Luciano. Maranzano positioned himself as the leader of the Sicilian faction, opposing Joe Masseria, who had dominated New York's underworld. What made Maranzano dangerous was not just his power, but his patience and strategy. He allowed others like Luciano to do the dirty work when necessary, including the assassination of Masseria in 1931. Winning the war, Maranzano made one of the most important decisions in mafia history. He reorganized New York's underworld into 5 families, each with its own boss, structure, and territory. This was revolutionary. Instead of chaotic gangs fighting constantly, Maranzano created a structured criminal system with a boss, an underboss, capo regimes, soldiers. This structure still exists today. But here's where Maranzano made his fatal mistake. After reorganizing the mafia, he declared himself capo di capi, boss of bosses. This meant every mafia leader in America answered to him. For the older generation, this made sense. But for the younger, ambitious mobsters like Lucky Luciano, it was a step backwards, a return to dictatorship instead of cooperation. What many people don't realize, and what makes this story even more compelling, is that Maranzano was already planning another purge. He reportedly created a hit list of rising gangsters he saw as threats, including Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, and Vito Genovese. Maranzano intended to eliminate them and tighten his control over the mafia, but Luciano found out first. On September 10th, 1931, Maranzano was in his Manhattan office when men posing as government agents entered the building. They disarmed his bodyguards, entered his office, and stabbed him, shot him, killed him within minutes. The hit was carried out with military precision. This wasn't just a murder, it was a complete shift in mafia power. After Maranzano's death, Luciano eliminated the boss of bosses position entirely. Instead, he created the Commission, a council of mafia leaders who shared power rather than answering to one man. This move transformed organized crime into a cooperative network, making it far more stable and far more powerful for decades. Salvatore Maranzano ruled for only a short time, but his impact was enormous. He ended the old gang war era, created the five families, forced the mafia to evolve, but in the end, the very system he tried to control became the reason for his downfall. Because in the mafia, power doesn't last long when everyone answers to one man. Giuseppe Profaci was a mafia boss who built his empire on money, power, and control. But in the end, his greatest threat wasn't the law. It was his own family. And what made Profaci different from many early mob bosses was how well he blended legitimate business with organized crime. He ran an olive oil company, often referred to as Mamma Mia Olive Oil, importing products from Italy and selling them across New York. On the surface, he looked like a successful immigrant entrepreneur. But behind the scenes, this business gave him a legitimate income stream, a way to launder money, connections to shipping docks and to distribution networks, and influence over Italian-American business communities. Profaci wasn't just a gangster. He was part of the early model of the mafia as corporate-style operation. Profaci's real power came from something most viewers don't realize: the docks. He had influence over longshore unions, shipping operations, cargo handling. This meant he could steal shipments, control labor, and extort businesses importing goods. The waterfront was one of the most profitable rackets in New York, and Profaci had his hands in it. This also connected him to broader mafia operations across the city, making his family extremely powerful despite being less flashy than others. Unlike leaders like Carlo Gambino, who kept their men loyal through balance, Profaci pushed things too far. He demanded heavy tribute payments from soldiers and captains, a percentage of nearly every operation, and additional contributions for religious donations and personal causes. Some members joked and even complained that they were paying him like he was both a boss and a tax collector. This created serious resentment inside the family. By the late 1950s, that resentment exploded into violence. A group of younger mobsters, many of them veterans of Profaci's own organization, had rebelled. Key figures included Joseph Colombo, who later involved in leadership shifts, and Joseph Malagiocco. It involved kidnappings, shootings, internal power struggles. This wasn't an outside enemy. This was his own family trying to overthrow him. Another fascinating layer of Profaci: he was deeply religious. He donated heavily to the Catholic Church, the religious causes, community organizations. But here's the contrast that makes it compelling. He was funding churches while running extortion rackets and criminal enterprises. For storytelling, this duality is gold. But before the war could fully remove him, Profaci died of cancer in 1962. But his death didn't end the chaos. Instead, it triggered a leadership struggle, the rise of Joseph Colombo, and the renaming of the family to the Colombo crime family. Giuseppe Profaci built a mafia empire on business, power, and control. But in the end, it wasn't the police or rival gangs that threatened him the most. It was the men standing right beside him.
Now we come to one of my favorite guys, Neil Dellacroce. I had the pleasure of meeting Neil. I did not know him well. He was Carlo Gambino's underboss. He was very, very well respected. He was later Paulie Castellano's underboss. He was a mentor to John Gotti. He served as underboss for a while. I really like Neil. He was an old-time guy. Everything I heard about him was very positive. I didn't know many people that had a bad word to say about him. Very, very well respected. And listen, anybody that was under, Gambino and under Castellano, you got to give him a lot of credit. I'm going to put him up there as one of the greatest of all times. And of course, he was John Gotti's mentor. But I think Neil deserves a lot of credit for his accomplishments in that life. And I know people say, come on, Michael, he was a bad guy. Listen, we're all bad guys at one time. But he accomplished a lot in that life. He died of natural causes. He didn't die in prison. That in itself is a lot, just like Carlo Gambino, boss for 20 years, dies, at his home in Massapequa, Long Island. So I put him down as one of the greatest of all times, without a doubt.
While bosses like Carlo Gambino and later Paul Castellano controlled the top of the organization, Dellacroce controlled something just as important: the streets. He had direct influence over loan sharking crews, gambling operations, hijacking crews, enforcement, which probably includes violence and discipline. And this made him incredibly powerful, not politically, but physically and operationally. Most soldiers didn't answer to the boss day to day. They answered to Dellacroce. Dellacroce represents something most viewers don't understand. He was the old mafia code in human form. He believed in loyalty above everything, silence, omerta, respect for hierarchy, street credibility. Meanwhile, Castellano represented a new era: corporate rackets, white-collar crime, business meetings instead of street presence. This created a split inside the Gambino family. Dellacroce faction, street guys, blue-collar criminals, loyal but dangerous. And Castellano's faction was business-oriented, financial schemes, less connected to the streets. Dellacroce was the glue holding these two together. Dellacroce's most important legacy is one name: John Gotti. Gotti wasn't just in the family, he was Dellacroce's guy. Dellacroce protected him, promoted him, trusted him. Even when Gotti got in trouble, Dellacroce backed him. And here's the key detail most people miss: Gotti would not have risen without Dellacroce. Now, when Carlo Gambino died in 1976, many believed Dellacroce should become boss. Instead, Gambino chose Paul Castellano. This could have caused a war. But Dellacroce did something rare. He accepted it. He stayed loyal, even though he had more street power, more respect from soldiers, more influence on the ground. That decision prevented a civil war inside the Gambino family. And of course, we all know how John Gotti took Castellano being made boss instead of his mentor Dellacroce. Obviously, John did the Sparks Steakhouse shooting of Castellano. Everybody's seen the videos or even the news footage. It wasn't nice, and it was in the open, meant to signify this is my time now. But everything changed on December 2nd, 1985, when Dellacroce died of cancer. And with him, the balance of power died too. Without Dellacroce, the street faction lost its leader, Gotti lost his protector, and Castellano lost control of the streets. So 2 weeks later, Castellano was assassinated outside the Sparks Steakhouse. Now, I think the truth most people miss is Dellacroce wasn't flashy. He wasn't famous. A lot of people liked him, even in different families. But he was something more important. He was the stabilizer of the Gambino crime family. Without him, the old mafia code collapsed, the new era of media-driven bosses began, and the organization became more exposed to law enforcement. Neil Dellacroce never became boss, but for years, he was the man who kept the mafia from tearing itself apart. And when he died, everything changed.
All right, and let's go to our last one on the list. And that was Joe Colombo, my boss at one time, somebody that I cared for very deeply, that I loved, very close to his family back then, and close with Chris Colombo, even though, I don't know, Chris had some things to say about me, but we patched it up. I don't know what was going on at that time, but anything is good. And look, you know, things happen on social media. I don't take it all to heart, and I don't know why people say things that they say at times, but forget that for a moment. Joe Colombo, where would he rank? Well, he certainly had a lot of influence, no question about that, because the family was named Joe Colombo, and he took it over from Joe Profaci. So why did they rename it Joe Colombo? Well, he had influence, that's why. You know, and during the time that he was boss over the family did very well. I know that for a fact. It was during my era. My dad was his underboss. So the family did well under Joe Colombo's rule. So was he a power player? He absolutely was. Listen, when he started the Italian American Civil Rights League, I mean, that thing grew because of his power, influence, and because of his charisma. No question about it. Now, obviously, I think he made some mistakes. The fact that he got so much media attention, it didn't help him out. Didn't help the family out later on, but he had the right intention. I want to make that clear. He had the right intention with that, in that he wanted to really, really do good for Italian Americans. He really did. And I can say that, and some people are going to knock me, come on, Michael, it was a front for the mafia. I don't believe that until this day. And I believe that the FBI took him out. I really do. I don't think it was Joe Gallo. I think it was the FBI that eventually took him out because of the impact that he was having, and because Italian Americans were really, really influenced by him in a positive way. He was doing things for kids at that time. So, you know, I have good things to say about Joe Colombo and his family. I was very friendly with his two boys. Both of them are dead at this point in time. Both Joey and Anthony, Joey Jr. and Anthony. And now, like I said, I'm close with Chris. So I got to put Joe Colombo as a big timer. And the family still has his name. Even though Persico took over after him, the family still has his name. So when somebody has that much influence and that much of a high profile in that regard, you got to put him in as a big timer. A high profile in a good way with respect to Cosa Nostra.
Joseph Anthony Colombo Sr. was one of the most unique and controversial mafia bosses in American history. A man who took organized crime out of the shadows and into the public spotlight. Joseph Colombo was born June 16th, 1923 in Brooklyn, New York, into a family with ties to organized crime. His father was reportedly murdered when Colombo was young, a loss that shaped his early life. He grew up in South Brooklyn, surrounded by Italian-American neighborhoods where mafia influence was common. As a young man, Colombo worked legitimate jobs, including as a longshoreman, but he quickly drawn into the world of organized crime. And he became associated with the Profaci crime family, led by powerful boss Giuseppe Profaci. Colombo's rise in the mafia was not based on violence alone. He was known for being intelligent, disciplined, and politically aware. In the early 1960s, after the death of Profaci, leadership of the family passed to Jose Magliocco. However, Magliocco made a critical mistake. He secretly plotted to assassinate powerful mafia leaders, Carlo Gambino and Tommy Lucchese. Colombo exposed this plot to the Mafia Commission. Instead of being punished, Colombo was rewarded. In 1963, at just 41 years old, he was appointed boss of the family. From that point forward, the organization became known as the Colombo crime family. What made Joseph Colombo different from every other mafia boss was his decision to go public. In 1970, he founded the Italian American Civil Rights League, claiming it was created to fight discrimination against Italian Americans. But many believed the real goal was to pressure law enforcement, influence public opinion, and protect organized crime operations. Colombo began holding large public rallies, speaking to the media, and appearing on television. For the first time, a mafia boss became a public figure. On June 28, 1971, Colombo organized a massive rally at Columbus Circle in Manhattan. Thousands attended. As Colombo greeted supporters, a man approached him. That man was Jerome A. Johnson. And without warning, Johnson pulled a gun and shot Colombo multiple times in the head and neck. Colombo collapsed instantly. And within seconds, his bodyguard shot and killed the gunman. Although Colombo survived the attack, the damage was devastating. He was left paralyzed, unable to speak, and in a near coma state. For the next 7 years, he remained incapacitated. During this time, the Colombo crime family fell into internal conflict, leading to violent power struggles. Joseph Colombo never recovered, and he died on May 22, 1978, at the age of 54. Joseph Colombo remains one of the most unusual figures in mafia history. He was one of the youngest bosses of a New York City crime family. He was the only boss to create a national public organization. And he was the victim of one of the most shocking public mob shootings ever. His decision to step into spotlight changed how the public viewed organized crime and likely made him a target. Joseph Colombo brought the mafia into the spotlight, but in the end, that spotlight may have been exactly what put him in the crosshairs. Salvatore D'Aquila was one of the earliest and most powerful mafia bosses in New York City, ruling during a time when organized crime was still evolving from loosely connected street gangs into structured criminal organizations. His rise marked the transition from the chaotic Black Hand era to the beginnings of what would later become the American Mafia. Salvatore D'Aquila was born November 7th, 1873, in Palermo, Sicily, a region deeply tied to the origins of the Mafia. Like many Sicilian immigrants of the late 19th century, he came to the United States seeking opportunity and settled in New York City. But instead of pursuing a traditional path, D'Aquila became involved in the growing criminal networks operating within the Italian immigrant communities. At the time, these groups were heavily involved in Black Hand extortion, targeting fellow immigrants with threats, violence, and intimidation. D'Aquila quickly proved himself capable and dangerous. D'Aquila's rise came after the decline of earlier mafia leaders, including Giuseppe Morello, who had dominated the underworld before being imprisoned. With a power vacuum forming, D'Aquila moved in. By the 1910s, he had established himself as one of the most powerful mafia figures in New York, controlling operations across Manhattan and Brooklyn. His organization was involved in extortion and protection rackets, gambling operations, labor influence, early forms of organized racketeering. Many historians considered his group to be the early foundation of what would later become the Gambino crime family. D'Aquila ruled through fear. He was known for being highly suspicious of rivals, quick to order violence, and determined to eliminate threats before they could grow. As new, ambitious gangsters began rising in New York during the 1920s, D'Aquila saw them as dangerous challengers. One of the most significant was Joe Masseria. Masseria was expanding his influence rapidly, and tensions between the two men grew. Then, on October 10th, 1928, Salvatore D'Aquila was walking near his home on Avenue A in Manhattan. As he approached his building, a car pulled up, gunmen opened fire. D'Aquila was shot multiple times and killed instantly. Although no one was officially convicted, many believe the hit was ordered by Joe Masseria, who would soon rise to become the dominant mafia boss in New York. D'Aquila's death marked the end of an important chapter in organized crime history. His assassination helped set the stage for the violent struggles that followed, conflicts that would eventually lead to the Castellamarese War. That war would reshape the mafia entirely, leading to the rise of figures like Lucky Luciano and the creation of the modern five-family system. Salvatore D'Aquila ruled New York's underworld during its earliest days, but in a world built on power and paranoia. Even the most powerful boss couldn't stay on top for long. And that's volume 2 of Mobsters Buried at St. John's Cemetery in Queens, New York. Thank you guys. Look for volume 3 coming soon.